Hello and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Green from CoachValerieGreen.com. And this podcast is dedicated to bringing you that mind, body, and spirit connection, both with yourself and with your true love, and interviewing all the experts that I can possibly find to help you do that. And so today I'm very excited to be interviewing Karen Baker, who is the creator of a company called Business as Pleasure, which I'll tell you about in a minute, about creating harmony with men from the bedroom to the boardroom. And this applies to both romantic relationships as well as business relationships with men. And so I'm so excited to introduce Karen to you. Hello, Karen.
Hi, Valerie. Good to see you.
I just love how even from the beginning, you're just so happy and blissful.
You know what I love to say? Happily ever after is a skill set and it can be learned. And I've been a
I
student for many years.
I love that. Like I'm gonna write about that in the show notes or something like that because it's just
Use
happily
it.
ever after is a skill set. I love that.
Yeah, we just get
And
it passed down in those emotionally tender moments where if we were fortunate, our mama was reading us a story. But as we know, it doesn't always go like that. So how to have
right,
it go like that because we say so.
right. How to create it to go like that, how to co-create it, right? Because it's about co-creation, as I'm sure you will elaborate on. So first, I will tell everyone a little bit about Karen, and then we'll really dive into this topic because Karen's just such an amazing creatrix of many things. So Karen is a published author and creator of Business as Pleasure, as well as the Life Worth Living Nurturary, which is a year-long program. She knows how to create great relationships and how to teach other people how to do the same. She strikes a deep emotional chord in her listeners with a system called emotional tones, which I look forward to telling you all about in this interview. She says people want and need fulfillment in life and work. The emotional tones allow people like you and me to connect in a genuine, feel good way. And this satisfies and gratifies our relationships and self esteem, as well as our shared accomplishment. So that's the gist of what she'll be sharing about. And Karen has excavated personal growth, gurus, community dynamics, and body wisdom to craft and teach a receptive feminine approach. She chooses to educate, inspire, and love people, which I love, into their victories with her company Business as Pleasure, and her clients call her the badass fairy godmother. I just love
Yeah.
that.
Carrie, have wand will travel.
Oh my God. See, you're just full of all these amazing sound bites. So first I'd love to ask you, Karen, what is emotional tone and how is that different from just tone of voice? And then we can
Mm.
dive in.
Yep. Thanks for asking. So the emotional tones have been evolving over the years. I came up with the name because I have been teaching that linguists tell us that only 7% of communication is the words that we're speaking. So that leaves 93% of the communication pie up for grabs. What
Yep.
is it?
Yep.
So I think 38% is tone of voice, and that leaves 50 something percent. The numbers aren't in front of me right now.
Yeah. But the
That's
majority.
body language.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
what is body language and why do I say emotional tones?
Yep.
So if I'm body language is much more than my posture or how I'm standing. It could be my level of animation. It could be how close I stand to you, but it could also be whatever emotion I'm experiencing in the moment is communicating through my tone of voice and my posture towards you. So if someone has a broken heart or they're grieving, we know what their energy feels like because when they come into the room, it feels different than if a 2-year-old toddler comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So the emotional tones combine the tone of voice with what the body's experiencing. If it's pressure or constriction in the heart due to a broken heart, or even it could be heartburn or arousal, those things are communicating through our words.
Yep.
and through our bodies, almost like our bodies are a satellite dish that's broadcasting. And then
Yes.
your body's a satellite dish that's receiving, and it's receiving tons of data. And the data that it's receiving above and beyond the words is the emotional tones.
Yep. Yeah. So I think I understand, and I want to have you perhaps flesh out a few examples because I think it's a very nuanced concept. So let's say I'm angry. What would be the example of having a harmonious emotional tone, even though I'm angry, versus a disharmonious emotional tone?
Boy, that's a great question. So, first of all, uh, emotions are hard to fake because it's not just our words. When we're in a live workshop, I often give the participants an example of say, I love you like you're jealous. Now say, I love you like you're angry. Now say, I love you like I love you with love
Right.
in your voice. And so we're all the time communicating words, but what we're actually saying is the tone of voice. So just
Yes.
to use I don't use the emotional tone of anger in my example. I actually use the emotional tone of resentment.
Okay.
And I distinguish anger as being something that flares up and it's gone. For
Mm-hmm.
example, we used to have water coolers at the office. I don't know if people still have them. Maybe you're at the Coke machine. And you see someone come in the room and you see that they look angry and you say, you look angry. And immediately they say, I'm not angry.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I see.
Oh, I get it. You're not. Okay.
So that's anger. It's like a quick flash. But my experience is most people repress their anger and instead they have it on a slow burn where it's called resentment.
Yeah. And resentment,
So
in my definition, is just, unresolved anger from the past where you're still holding a grudge.
that's exactly right.
Hmm.
So resentment also has, you could say resentment is the emotional tone. When resentment is present, the dynamic between us is pressure.
Yeah.
So you're pressuring me to do something that I don't want to do. I'm pressuring you. And the behaviors that we're going to see are coercion and familiarity. So in families, we often see familiarity, pressure, coercion.
Mm.
I think you asked me, how do we detoxify it? Is that what you asked me?
Um, that's a great question. How do we
I mean,
detoxify
sometimes
it?
you can't really detoxify it without taking a different action. Um,
Right.
so if I'm pressuring you and you feel resentful because I'm pressuring you, the antidote to that toxic tone of resentment would be cooperation.
Right.
So in a heartbeat, I could flip my emotion to excitement instead of resentment. Like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
we have the chance, Valerie, to break the pattern now. Let's do it
Right.
together. Let's stop pressuring each other and let's just jump in the pool together. Hey, you want to hold hands? Let's do it. And of course, the person that has been experiencing resentment might not want to right away join in. They may be like, why all of a sudden
No.
should I do that for you?
Right.
You know, they may be
Yeah.
familiar. You've done this to me a million times. And so, what's important is modeling the behavior that you want and being persistent with it. It might take weeks, it might take months before they respond to you with excitement and cooperation. Because the truth is, they've been being pressured and resented upon all these months. So it may
Hmm.
not work automatically. But
Yeah. I
when
think
we're
that's a
committed to light-hearted emotional tones, we do have to persist.
I agree. I think it's really good that you said that because it's true that it doesn't, if there's a long-standing dynamic of disharmony, it's like a cruise ship that has momentum sailing through the ocean. You can't just turn it around on a dime.
Not like that.
It needs to be turned around slowly and with persistence. So I agree with that.
And
Um,
maybe even with communication, like, hey, honey, I'm going to do my best to stop pressuring you, and I'm going to need your help I'm going to need your cooperation because I've never tried this before. I'm not feeling comfortable. I'm afraid I'll fail. I'm afraid I'll be rejected. Could you just give me a little grace here? Could you
Yeah.
fake your excitement? Could you say, okay, I'll come along, even if you're not 100% wholehearted about it?
Yeah,
My
or
mentor used to
maybe
say, any cheap and dirty trick,
that's
because
really
it's
cute.
worth
Although
it.
it is worth it. Although I don't think that people have to fake. I think people can use their creativity to find something that's authentic. Like maybe they don't feel excited, but they feel willing.
We can literally change our emotions on a dime. We just don't know we can.
It's
But
true.
if
I
enough
mean,
is at stake, like maybe a hungry grizzly bear outside your door, you would go from your depression to action instantly.
of course, except that's through fight or flight, which is not the best way to shift our feelings. And I'm sure that both of us have our own tools that we use to shift our feelings. And of course, that would be the topic of another interview, unless we choose to talk about that, because that's a whole nother set of tools. Right now, I think tone of like the emotional tones are so important. And the question is, well, of course, you have to shift your vibe in order to go from resentment to cooperation. There's many ways to do that. But you don't have to shift the feeling. You have to shift your beliefs, in my opinion. You have to focus on what's possible if I shift, right? And then
You can also focus on your behaviors. So there's three things
mm-hmm,
to focus on, and there's more, your beliefs, right? But I try to bypass the mind
mm-hmm,
because the mind is like a wheel that's a square. It's like clunk,
right.
clunk. But in the body, you can instantly
Mm-hmm.
feel it. Oh my God, I felt that resentment. I felt like she wants to take me out, right? And in the moment, I can say, hey, instead of let's doing this, let's cooperate. Like
Yes.
I can just use the language in a heartbeat and use the way my approach is. Like I can even lean in and get closer, right? Let's not do that again. I see you're feeling hurt and so am I. Let's do something we're both excited about. And the best parents do this all the time. They're able to help their kids. Um, I can't think of the word, but kind of, there is a word that's used often in growth circles these days, but kind of alignment with something different. And that's why I say women are really the emotional leaders in any relationship because we're very agile with our emotions. But if we're the ones that are always down in the mouth, feeling depressed and angry, then we're not going to be able to lead other people in our lives out of that space. So that's why I
Mm-hmm.
specifically educate women, is because we have a lot of bandwidth. We have a lot of
Yeah.
octaves, as Mama Gina says.
Yes, yes. I mean, I agree. There's a lot of reasons why, in my opinion, feminine women, and what I'm talking about is feminine energy women that are attracted to masculine energy men, because obviously I have no shoulds about gender and sexual orientation. Um, and if you are a feminine energy woman, we generally do have more access to our emotions than masculine energy men because for many reasons, both biology and socialization, our emotions are more on the surface and therefore it's easier for us to work with them. And so therefore it's our whoever has the easier time working with their emotions, it's our responsibility then to shift the emotional tone.
Absolutely. I mean, look, the masculine has more musculature because of testosterone and other hormones. And so typically they are the ones out there doing that construction, heavy lifting kind of work because they're more suited to it. And then
Right.
women
Which
are
doesn't
more
mean that
suited
women
to the
don't,
nurturing
right?
work. Say it again.
Right. Which doesn't mean that women don't, right? I mean, obviously I'm in approval of all genders and all people doing whatever gives them pleasure. And I agree that we are best suited for certain tasks given our unique makeup. And so I imagine for those women that are listening that you do sense that you can shift the emotional tone. And that's what we're going to give you the tools to do. And so I know that you sent me a document that you wanted me to do a screen share of. And for those that are listening to the audio of the podcast, I will put the screen share. I'll put the document inside the show notes on my webpage. And so that's going to be coachvaleriegreen.com/podcast/Karen, Karen. And so anyway, I'll do the screen share now for the video, and then we can talk about the emotional tones, because I think it would be helpful to see them as you go over them.
Yeah. Would you like me to briefly run through the chart and how it works?
Yeah. So why don't I go ahead and open it?
So my
And
ladies, when they do a class with me, they keep this by their side after the class, because the first thing that I'm helping people become aware of is their just become aware, to just become aware that the tone of voice isn't just off-putting, but actually has a certain flavor to it. So if you look
yeah.
on the left, starting from 1 to 7, those correspond with the system called the chakras. So you may know, oh, he was so scared, he crapped his pants, right? That's the emotion of fear. And it occurs right down there in the red zone under number 1. And then we
Mm-hmm.
move up the body to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh chakras with corresponding
Mm.
colors and the corresponding emotions that go along with them.
Yes, I love that. And for those
So
that
the
are
left-hand
listening,
side,
and yes, anyway, you'll explain it. I will let you.
this is about creating harmony. So we all inherit a certain tone, if you will. If we grew up with country music, we know the tone of country music. I grew up with opera. My mom piped in the Met to our house in Houston every Saturday because she was a cultured person. And so I grew up knowing what arias and duets sounded like, and knew what a soprano was, etc. So these are tones that typically we grow up with. Maybe a tone of intimidation in your household, could have been a tone of blame. When we do this work in corporate settings, we find that many people get attention in their workplace by complaining. And
Or,
that's how they get attention. And
politics
the
is
whole,
certainly based on
yep,
blaming the other person, and the other
that's right.
person is wrong.
You really can see that polarized blame in our political system. Thanks for bringing that. So those are what we call power overtones. They're not effective to build relationship. They're effective to get your way, regardless of the cost to the relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the power overtones. We see them everywhere. We are raised with them. So just like if you heard country music growing up, if you heard criticism growing up, then you learned to criticize. If you
Yeah.
learned coercion, you learn to coerce. It's just children model the behavior that they see, and they imitate their parents and they become their parents unconsciously.
Right.
So when you're ready to stop being your parent, or stop being the kind of parent that your parent was, or the kind of person, then you can look to the right side to the power with tones. And the power with tones are the literal antidote to the toxic tones on the left-hand side. You can see the tone of fear is not going to bring people closer. The tone of resentment is going to push others away. The tone of sadness will only attract more sad people.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're ready for some power with people, and not only that, but personal power with ourselves, we move to the right-hand side. And intimidation, which is the dynamic, turns into connection. So instead of the trying to threaten or withhold, or whatever the different behaviors that cause fear in another are, we just create connection by listening and touching. And I'm in the lower right-hand corner right now.
Yes.
The connection is the dynamic. Like Valerie and I started out talking before we started recording, we started talking, we started laughing. So we were up in the orange rectangle. We were
Mm.
talking about what we wanted to discuss with y'all today. I was listening to her. She said some things that touched my heart, and I said some things that touched her heart. We were creating connection. And then we got
Yes.
up to laughing, and I brought out my magic wand. We started
Yes.
playing a little. We
I
talked
love that.
about backdrops and what happens to our hair when we go on a
Yeah.
backdrop on Zoom. So we were moving it up the scale from trust to passion or playfulness. Now we're at cooperation and excitement. If you keep building the tones, you can get with people all the way to a state of encouragement or imagination. This is taking people up the scale with you. You have to go there first to guide them there. But there's no reason to really ever blame anyone. When someone does something I don't like, I don't blame them. I accept that they did it. I feel love that I can accept their behavior, and then I share my love with them. So this is a little bit about how it works. And believe it or not, when I accept people instead of blaming them, it's amazing how much they want to be around me.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that this is pure gold. I think the question that most people have is how do you do that? Like, how do you shift from intimidation to connection? It seems like, or the emotional tone of fear to trust. Like,
Well,
how do
that's
you do
why I
that?
have the behaviors down there, because sometimes behaviors, people either, there's different ways that people behave based on, I don't know what, but let's say I behave from my behavior and I behave from my perception, but I don't do well with structure. So when I can perceive something, then I can interact with it in an appropriate manner. So the first thing is to become aware that sometimes you intimidate others. It might be
Mhm.
hard to accept or admit, but if you stay curious, you'll see that maybe sometimes when you're driving your car, you intimidate other people. Or maybe when someone looks like they're going to let their dog poop on your yard, you give them a look. Or
Right. And that is a
certainly,
look of intimidation. Like, you're not going to do that on my lawn, which is not a bad thing, but it doesn't lead to connection. It doesn't
no,
lead
it
to
doesn't lead
a
to connection.
harmonious connection with your neighbor. And so let's take that as an example because I think that's a one can that everyone could relate to. That's not so about romantic relationships. So like you're in your front lawn and you see someone walking their dog and they're walking onto your lawn. And so you want to intimidate them, but then you know that it would help to come from the behavior of cooperation instead or connection instead. So how do you do that? What does that look
Okay, so the first thing I do is I'm aware. Like, I'm aware that I already want to tell them what to do. That's called correction.
like?
I already
Mm-hmm.
want to tell them, get off my lawn. That's correction.
Right.
And I'm already skeptical that they're going to curb their dog. I already am pretty sure that they're going to do the bad thing.
Right.
Well, when I know that they're going to do the bad thing, that's called fear. So I'm
Right.
like, oh, I'm experiencing fear. But most people just experience their emotions, but they never really call them out and bring their attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, and then the next step, unconsciously, it happens so quickly. Get your dog off my lawn. Don't let it crap here. That's
Right.
intimidation. So it
Right.
happens in a couple of heartbeats.
Right.
So, first, my guess is we have to become aware enough to see that that's one of our reactive patterns.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So this
And
is
we're about
all
to
like,
try to put our power onto that other perfectly grown adult and tell them the way the world is and the way that they should be.
right.
So typically, what I do is I'm like, oh man, I feel emotion. Like I feel irritated and like I'm going to say something I don't want to say. So my
Mm-hmm.
awareness is key.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That's the self-awareness. And I think
Yeah,
that most of us have patterns that keep repeating. So it'll be useful to ask, well, which one of these 7 areas do I tend to have the most power over? Is it with
exactly. Where do I fall? In other words,
Mhm.
what's my home tone? Where
Right,
do I
exactly.
typically go? Like for me, I typically go to blame. And what
Hmm.
that
Yep.
looks like is I withhold information. I feel a certain way, but I don't tell my partner. When he asks what's the matter, I say nothing. That's called withholding.
I'm only laughing
And it's
because I'm
also
sure
called
that most of us
romance.
have done that at some point.
Romance is wanting things to be different than the way they are. I feel like shit, but I
Mm,
wish I didn't. So I'm going to pretend that nothing's wrong.
mhm. Right, right, right.
That
That's
rings a
the
bell.
romantic notions. Yes, yes, yes.
Romantic notions, right? So
Mhm.
back to the lawn episode. I just noticed I'm about to be away with this person that I don't really want to be. And maybe I don't want to be this way with him, but I certainly don't want to practice being that way because then I'm going to be that way with my son. I'm going to be that way with my husband. I'm going to be that way with my boyfriend, with my sisters, because whatever we've practiced is what we get good at. So
Yep.
if I have practiced intimidating others, I'm probably pretty good at it at this point, but it doesn't make people love me more. And by the
Right.
way, parenthetically, I think a lot of women opt out of those C-suite positions because they don't want to be called bitch behind their back. And they don't
Mhm.
have a more effective way to lead than the one that they've seen. But many male leaders don't really care what they're
Right,
called behind their back. They just want to get the job done. That's
right,
called power over. On the
right,
other hand, women, we want to be loved, admired, and appreciated at the same time as we get the job done.
right.
In order to do that, we have to have connections. So we have to trust, first of all, that we're not going to die in the moment that the dog is approaching our lawn,
Right, right,
and
right.
that the end of our life is not nigh. This really
Yes.
isn't going to, it's nothing worth being fearful about.
Right.
So then maybe just we take a breath and we're like, okay, I noticed I just went into fear there, or panic mode, or reaction. There's a lot of different ways to call it, or fight or flight, or stress. Oh, okay, well, let me see. That's first step is we just got connected with ourselves.
Yes.
We
Right,
felt
exactly.
into what our own emotional tone was. And then we can say, oh my gosh, I don't really want to treat that person from that point of view. I would rather just say, hey, are you new to the neighborhood? Because I haven't met you before. I'm so persnickety about my lawn. I've worked so hard to get it this green. When you walk your dog, would you mind very much never pooping on my lawn? And just telling them what's important to you. That's called touching people. It doesn't have to be physical, it
Right,
can
right.
also be emotional.
Emotional
And then
touching.
listening to them. How come
Mm,
you're walking your dog? Why did you move here? How come I've never seen you before?
yes, exactly. And the tone is really important. Like what I sense is that you're coming from genuinely wanting to create a connection and being curious. And so that's something I'm sure you teach people how to do, how to make it authentic.
You know what? Those behaviors make it authentic, Valerie.
Mm,
We don't even have to worry about whether it's authentic or not. The very act of reaching for a connection and listening to another person creates trust. Those very actions, touching and listening.
yeah, I love that because if we talk about how to shift a feeling, there's the triangle in neurolinguistic programming because a feeling is expressed, right, with your beliefs and thoughts, it's with your physiology and body language, right? And then it's also what you're thinking about and what you're doing, the behavior, right? And so I think that what's really important is that you're focusing on because a lot of people shift their beliefs first. And like you're saying, the mind is, like awkward and clunky. And so what you're saying is to just get into your body and say, what am I feeling? And then focus on the behaviors. And it's in doing these behaviors. And this handout will be easy to access in the show notes, as I explained. And of course, if you're listening, feel free to type a comment if you can't find it. But if we have this handout in front of us, it's easy to then say, okay, like for me, I think probably my power over go-to is complaining. Like when something isn't working for me, I complain about it. And that's actually what caused my husband to teach me the concept about the pillars, which I now talk about with my clients, that a house is built, it's like you can imagine a relationship as a house that's held up by pillars. And the pillars represent the positive feelings between you. And when those are strong, then there's room to put like heavy things in the house and it won't fall down. But if they're weak and then you put heavy things, then the pillars aren't strong, it'll fall down. And so if I complain more than I appreciate what's working well, then the pillars fall down. And so I know that I don't want to be complaining. And so if I look at my behavior and I want to focus on the behaviors and the emotional tone of acknowledgement, and then that'll make me, because that's the opposite, the power with is acknowledgement rather than complaining. I would feel enthusiastic and I'd be focusing on the behaviors of encouragement, and then demanding what I imagine, because I'm reading off the list, demanding I imagine to be that I'm going to stand up for what I want rather than complain about what I don't want. Is that what you mean?
That's right. And demanding is also raising the bar. All good
Right.
leaders demand performance.
Right.
It's
Right.
not about pouting. You see, pouting is on the power over side.
Right. Yeah, because there's no power in that. It's all about pouting so the other person does the work and not taking responsibility. Right. And so, like, let's say if I give myself an example, just to make sure I understand what you're saying, let's say my husband is in the other room and, he doesn't shut the door when he's on a call. And so his sound gets in and it bothers me. Let's say that's what I'm complaining about, And so I can complain, like, you never shut the door. What would it take
You
for you to shut the
could
door?
complain. You never shut the door. That's right.
Right. Not that I
That
would
would
do
be
that.
called criticism, right?
Yes, exactly. I'm
Or
exaggerating. And that would of course lead him to feel disrespected and less close to me. Or if I'm focusing on acknowledgement and encouragement and demanding, then I would acknowledge the situation. I wouldn't complain. I would acknowledge it and say what I wanted, right? I would just say, hey, I notice, right? I'm acknowledging what I see. I'm noticing that I normally see the door open, and the impact is that the sound gets into the living room. And so I'm wondering um, if it could be quiet in here. And my standard is for it to be quiet in here. And so what do you think you could do in order to help me with that?
exactly. What kind of a response do you think you'd get if you said that?
Right. Then he go, oh, you're right. I didn't close the door. I'm going to have to figure out how to remember that. And he'll take responsibility.
That's exactly right.
Yep. Yeah.
Because
So,
it's not what we say, it's how we say it.
yep.
Like the example of I love you in three different emotional tones. You
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that's important about the emotional tones is you could say the same words, but you could have the tone of complaining.
Right.
You could
Exactly.
say those same words, but what people experience is not our words. Remember, it's only 7% of the communication. What they're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing is our emotional tone and
Exactly.
our tone of voice.
Exactly.
So our
Yeah. So,
bodies are talking to each other. And of course, your man wants to respond to your body with his body, but whether we want to or not, we're still doing it.
exactly. And
We're
we want him to
we're
respond
not just
positively.
talking heads. We're entire networks of sensation. And when we can speak in ways that vibrate pleasantly the other
Mm,
person's physiology, then it's easier to get what we want. And it always starts with connection because connection creates an
exactly.
experience of trust. And then we can build on
Yes.
that.
I
I practice
love that.
connection all day long. Even if I talk to the person 5 times a day, like I do with my partners, I still make connection right off the bat. I don't assume that the connection is there.
Mm,
Connection for me is a discipline, it's a practice. It's my
right.
home base to come to trust with others.
Yeah, I agree. And so the handout is here. I'm inclined to stop sharing so people can see us. But then, of course, if people want to have the handout handy, they can open it in the background and, like I said, post a comment if you can't find it. So now it's back to us again. Mm.
Thanks for
Uh,
sharing that.
yeah, I mean, I think it's really helpful to have a visual, and I still have it in front of me because I think what would be helpful is to go over different examples. Like, what are the most popular examples that you can think of that get women into trouble in relationships? And then what emotional tone would they be using? And then what's the antidote? And then we can give a couple of examples so people really
Okay,
bring
good.
this
Well,
close to
one thing I
home.
want to say, I appreciate you asking that, is that lots of times I hear women complain about the way that men are.
Mhm.
However, at this point, we can pretty much be sure that men are going to be that way. Because I've heard so many women complain, it's not a secret that they're going to be that way. And
Yeah.
two of the things that men do to get their way, because remember, men, just like us, are raised in a system that has a pecking order.
Yeah.
And it's very important for the masculine, the competitive masculine, to be on top or to win. So
Right.
we know that they're going to be that way. This is not news, ladies. So we know that in order to be on top, they're going to do whatever it takes. And the most common ones that they use with women are intimidation, which is instilling fear of loss. So you won't get the job if you don't have sex with me, or you'll lose the job if you don't stay after hours. And
What? I mean, those are both very toxic. I just want to say.
so intimidation is often used by men with women, but ladies, don't feel special. Men use it with each other too.
Right.
It's just they're using it back and forth with each other
Right.
because they're taught to intimidate. That's the way they're raised. But
Yeah.
when they do it with us, you have to know a way to respond, but don't get mad. Like Ivanka Trump said, don't get mad, get everything you want. Don't get mad. You already know it's going to happen. If you go to a seafood restaurant, they're going to serve shrimp. Ladies, if you're talking to a man, odds are at some point he's going to intimidate you. It's
Right. And
just
so
what they
then
do.
how do you respond? Right. Like I know I like I love this because it's like accepting has to come first. Just like I was saying, acknowledging that the door is open in that example. You're
Yeah, we
not
can't make them
pretending
wrong. The
and
moment we make them
fantasizing
wrong,
that
we put them on the defensive.
right.
And then they're going to get worse than intimidation. Now they're going to start coercing us.
Yeah.
So just go, oh, I've seen that behavior before, right? You're doing like an internal thought bubble, like in the cartoons.
Yes.
Oh,
I've
I've
seen
seen
that
that
before.
before. What did Karen say to do?
Yes.
Oh, well, here's what I do with my son. You can come up with your own ways, but my son is about 5 to 6 inches taller than me. He's at least 100 pounds heavier than me. And sometimes he starts with his intimidation act.
Yes.
And so I just look at him and I go, Avi, are you trying to intimidate me? You know that doesn't work. So you can be honest. You can touch his heart with your sweetness. That's what I do. I call that emotionally touching my son. I say it
Mm.
in a sweet voice. Are you trying to intimidate me? And I smile and I laugh and I go, you know, that doesn't work with me. And then I tell him, because I'm his mom, that doesn't work with women at all. You're a big man. You're stronger than most people you meet. If you do that, you're going to scare them. You can literally talk to a man like that if he's trying to
Hmm.
intimidate you.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
let him
I mean, you wouldn't
intimidate
want to
you,
like
educate him.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you have, of course, license to educate him a little more because he's your son. But if there is a big, strong man in front of you, let's say in the workplace, trying to intimidate you, you can absolutely say, are you trying to intimidate me? That's not going to work. But let's talk about what you want and what I want.
That's perfect. Bring it right up to cooperation, right?
Right.
And it
Right.
may not be intimidating. You can just say, did I hear you threatening me? Are you telling me that I would lose my job if I don't have sex with you? I don't
Right.
think that that's really what you meant. Let's talk about what it is that needs to happen here to get the job done. We're
Right.
here for the same
Exactly.
reason. That's just
Right.
honesty. It's not losing our shit because some guy did what guys do.
Right. And of course, like there's many different nuances to that situation, but we're just talking about the bare bones of it. Like if a man tries to intimidate you, here's what you can do or say that maintains the emotional tone of cooperation.
Or just brings it to trust. So
Right.
telling the truth creates trust.
Hmm. Right. And
Now,
the
saying
actual
it in a
truth, like,
blaming tone,
right. Right.
that doesn't create
Right.
trust.
The actual truth, like meaning what is it that you really want here and what is it that I really want here, right? Like you really want to whatever it is that you want. You're trying to intimidate me in order to get the job done. Okay, let's talk about what it would take to get the job done. What is the
That's
job?
being
What's
honest.
required?
And that's
What's required
also
of me? What's
offering
required of
to
you? What's required of
listen.
other people? Right.
Like you're right there saying, tell me what you need. Because he actually doesn't know what he's doing.
Right,
He's
right, right.
not
Most men
nuanced
don't
like
know
you
what they're
are.
doing. And
And
like that actually snaps people out of it, usually. Now, of
he's
course, if he
also been
really
taught to do
is,
that. All of society teaches him to get your way by intimidation.
I know, I know. And of course, in the example, when men actually are doing sexual harassment, there's other repercussions that we
Let's
can
get to that one.
address. Right. I mean, because that's, I mean, it is sexual harassment to say you have to sleep with me if you want to
So
keep your
the
job.
other thing that they do, we know they're going to intimidate us because they're raised to win and compete and to get their way. And one way they get their way is by intimidating others.
Yeah.
So the other way that we know men are going to try to get their way with us, have power over us rather than us being powerful with them, is by seduction. And
Mhm.
some men do it to every woman. Some men only do it for their type but you can expect to encounter it. I seldom ask a room of women that every woman doesn't raise her hand when I ask who's been sexually harassed in this room. Lots of
Yeah.
them have faced much worse than that. But
Mhm.
at the very least, someone making inappropriate comments. And what you do there is um, you can also call it out. You can say, hey, um, are you trying to seduce me? Because that's not going to work with me. Can we get down to business?
Right.
But all the time, you're saying it in a lighthearted way. You're not saying it with all the angst and drama, like, oh, how dare you? If you do that, that drives them into their reactive behavior. You
Right.
just have to
Totally.
call out what you see. Just like if your dog were peeing on the carpet, you wouldn't go, you little so and so. You'd go, no, don't do that. Come outside.
Right.
And so you have to
Redirect it.
talk
Do
in
this
that
instead.
calm way,
Right.
right? So
Exactly.
if they know that they can intimidate you and seduce you by intimidating and seducing you, they'll keep doing it. We really get to learn how to keep our cool. So I'm looking at the opposite of seduction, which is passion and yielding, is really you can literally just have a good time with it. Oh, there's that old trick again. Men are always asking me things like that. And the answer is no. Can we get back to business?
Right. Right.
Or,
Right. Exactly.
no,
Being
I
playful
don't do
about
that
it.
on a first date. Not interested. Do you want to continue having coffee?
Right, exactly. Yeah, or what I encourage women to do if they're attracted to a guy on a first, second, third, whatever date, and they're not ready to be intimate yet, is to yes and them to be like, "Ooh, I love your passion, and I'm actually really attracted to you too, and I'm not ready for that yet. I need to get to know you more first." Right?
That's
So that
exactly
like
right.
doesn't make him
Playing,
feel
laughing,
rejected.
having fun, not making them wrong. Literally, they don't know what they're doing. I wish I
Yeah,
could say that they do, but
I
until a
know.
woman tells them the truth, they're just doing what they saw other guys do. They think that's
Mhm.
literally the way to behave.
I know it's very sad that, people just aren't taught in mainstream culture how to actually get what they want in a harmonious way. So that's why we have to teach that because that's the opportunity.
That's right.
Um, and I
We
mean,
get
not
to
that other
be the
people aren't
change
teaching
we
it, but
want to see. You know,
yes,
all men grew up
absolutely.
with women as their teachers, or most men grew up with women as their teachers. If they grew
Mhm.
up with a mom, they learned to listen to a woman. But unfortunately, the women that they listened to didn't necessarily have access to the emotional tones. And so they used a lot of hurtful power overtones. And then
Mhm.
when men hear those, they go into reaction and feeling bad about themselves and
Right.
flex themselves more. So
Yeah, no,
we're really
exactly.
the call and they're the response. We set the tone.
It's true. And, we shared some reasons for that in the beginning, because, just we have whoever has the easier access to their emotions sets the emotional tone. Um, and so let's come up with one more example because I think the sexual harassment one might be a little bit edgy for people. Let's
Yep.
come up with another way that men use these toxic emotional tones with women in general and how to respond to them in a positive
Okay.
way.
I have a good one. So, you're with your boyfriend or your partner or even your boss or your employee, and the conversation goes like this: Where would you like to go to lunch? Oh, I don't care. Where do you want to go? Oh, I don't care. How about Spanish food? No, we had Spanish food last week. I'm not in the mood. Have you ever heard conversations like this?
Nobody's taking responsibility.
That's right. We call it prevention, and it leads to tiredness.
It
And
does.
that's called power over on the emotional tones chart. It's in the orange section, and it's where no one will say what they want. So
Right.
the way out of it is to be playful and what's the word? The way out of it is to be I can't say what the word is because it's too awkward to say the word domination. People hear it the wrong way. But the way that people dominate each other is that no one insists on getting what they want. Valerie, if you and I are going out, either I'm going to insist that you get what you want, or I'm going to insist that I get what I want. I'm not going to have it be a boring time. I'm going to make sure we have fun. That's my job.
Oh, I
So
love
when
that.
people don't say what they want, that leads to a lack of passion or a lack of excitement. So I have a practice of getting on a call knowing what I want, going to a date knowing what I want.
Mm,
Because if they don't know what they want, I certainly don't want to hem and haw and ruin the energy of the relationship by
right.
not knowing. And we always want something, even if it's just chocolate ice cream. We can find something
Exactly.
that we want. And so
Exactly. And who doesn't like
don't
chocolate
let
ice
your
cream?
relationship fall into, um, I don't care. What do you want?
Hmm. Right,
He wants to
exactly.
please you. If you don't tell him what you want, he can't please you.
Yep, it's so true. And if he asks you what you want is because he wants to know.
He doesn't want you to put it back on him. He's being the hero by taking you to what you want, right?
Right.
The masculine fulfills the desire, the feminine expresses the desire. So if it's hard for you to decide what you want, start a list of all the
Hmm.
restaurants in town that you want to visit, of all the movies you want to see, all the kinds of shoes you want to try on.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't want to, like, I talked to some women who are like, I want the man to choose the restaurant, then what I recommend, because then I feel taken care of, but you need to give him something to go on, right? So you
Exactly.
can
Give them
say
a
something
list of
like,
three.
I'm in the mood for Italian and I want somewhere with a nice atmosphere that has candlelight. Could you find a restaurant with those things? Just give him
Precisely.
something to go on, because like men don't want to have to guess what you want and then get it wrong. That's what they're scared of.
And then also, if they get it wrong, then we typically turn a disapproving eye on it instead of appreciating that they tried, right? So we complain, I don't like this, instead of acknowledging, I see you really went out of your way to find a nice place for us to go. And I appreciate that. There's
Yes,
always something to
exactly.
appreciate in every situation.
Exactly. And if for whatever reason it doesn't work, then you would say what you want different, right? Oh my gosh, I didn't realize they only had outdoor seating and I'm freezing. Do you want to lend
That's
me your jacket
exactly
or like
right.
what would be a good solution? Or maybe we could find a different place. What do you think? Right. It's just giving suggestions about what it is that you need. Um,
Yep. And they want to listen when we're not attacking. When there's connection, which is the first box on the power with, then there's trust and it's characterized by touching and listening. So if
right.
you're listening to one another, that's a good sign that there's trust there. But
Mhm.
literally, the masculine tunes out when it hears the tones of power over. Literally, men just want us to be women. It's very confusing for them when we're not. They really don't know how to behave because they're getting incongruent messages. They see the feminine in front of them, which is beautiful, attractive, and fascinating, but they feel the masculine coming out of us and they don't know how to be. They're confused. They're
Right.
not as complex as emotionally as we are. So it's more challenging for the average man to embrace all the complexities of a human. That's why we raise the kids
Right,
because
right, right.
we're nurturers. We're naturally tuned into all those complexities.
Yeah, and of course those are generalizations, but I do find them to be generally true. And so why don't we talk a little bit more about what are men's particular sensitivities and
Hmm.
why it's important to choose an emotional tone to not trigger that sensitivity. You already talked about how they tune us out if we're making them wrong and criticizing.
Yeah, so
Um,
men are very sensitive to criticism and very sensitive to anger
From
um,
women. I mean, in
from
general, but
women.
when a woman is angry, usually it triggers him to regress to being 5 years old and being reprimanded by his mom. And that's not how you
Mhm.
want to make him feel.
And sometimes it can escalate literally to hostility if the woman doesn't handle her own anger. So we remember that the human body's like a satellite dish. It's receiving signals. It's also sending signals. So if we're angry and we haven't resolved our anger for ourselves, then we're going to be communicating that to our kids, to our mates, to our coworkers. We can't help it. It's unconscious. So the first trick is connection to self is really noticing how are we feeling and then establishing practices that we
Mhm.
use over time to handle our own emotional state so that when
Yeah.
we come to people we have an emotional tone that's palatable, that doesn't set them into fight or flight.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite examples is, the line, honey, we have to talk. Well, to men's credit, even though they know that their head is on the chopping block, when they hear those words with that tone, they still meet with us because they love us and they want to please us. But they can feel that threatening tone in the
Mhm.
moment that we say it. I even texted my boyfriend last week, um, I want to talk. And he addressed it with me, and it sent him into fear. It wasn't
Mhm.
panic, it was just mild fear,
Right.
but enough that he reacted. And they're very sensitive to women's anger.
Mhm. Exactly. Like, just, I want to talk over a text. He's going to imagine you having an angry tone.
That's right. Maybe
Yep.
I did have one. Maybe I was unconscious to it. And maybe what I wanted to talk about had a little charge for me, and I didn't
Mhm.
realize
Mhm. Right,
it.
exactly. So it's
So
important. I mean, I teach that it's important over text to say the tone in words, because if you don't, then obviously he's going to assume the worst. That's just what happens over text. If you say, we need to talk, he's going to imagine it in an angry tone, usually, even if you didn't mean it in an angry tone. So,
And
what,
basically it sends him into fear.
right, exactly. Like, I never recommend saying to men, we need to talk. It's just, it sounds intimidating.
Maybe like, I can't wait to talk to you. I'm really excited to share some news with you.
Exactly. Or if that's not authentic, right? Like if you really want to talk about something that you're angry about, I still think if you're committed to coming from a tone of cooperation, then you would say something because it's about the behavior, right? Then it's about saying something like, I want to talk to you about something that is going to bring us closer when we work through it, right? Like you're
That's
gonna
a sweet way to
you want
say
to
it, right?
say what, because men are also always thinking about what's the point, right? What are we gonna get out of talking? And
That's
so if
right.
you lead with the point, what's the positive place we're gonna get to at the end? And that's also setting the tone, right?
Yeah, like speak to the arousal factor, hold the carrot out.
Yes, exactly. And that's not manipulation if you know that men are actually, that's what they're always wanting to know anyway, is what am I going to get out of it? That's just what they're always asking
They're
themselves because that's
results
the
oriented.
masculine question to ask. And so tell him what he's going to get out of it. It's not a manipulation, it's working with his way of being.
Yep. It's working with his motivation, working with
Mm-hmm.
his inspiration. So the main thing that men and the masculine are sensitive to is anger. And
Mm-hmm.
that is because they've experienced it so many times growing up.
Right. It's
It's a
true.
little like a dog whistle that has a very high pitch that only the dog's ears can hear, and humans are oblivious to it. The
Right.
masculine can feel the anger before we even know we're angry,
Right.
and they want to
Mhm.
avoid it at all costs.
Yeah,
It
because they
hasn't
don't
been
want to
good
feel
to them in the
ashamed.
past.
Right. Like they don't want to feel inadequate, which is
Mm-mm.
where they go usually if they feel blamed and shamed.
Super important for men to win.
Exactly. And so that's why it's important if you're angry to look at the handout and say, what emotional tone am I coming from? Right. And then what's the opposite? So I
And
love that you have
handle
this
the
handout.
tone, like call a girlfriend and express yourself for 5 minutes. Or there's many practices. Valerie, I don't know if you teach them. Mama Gina has spring cleaning.
Yes, yes,
We
yes,
have fear inventory. We have
yes.
pulling withholds. We have emotional release exercises that we can use to move the energy through our bodies without
Right,
content necessarily, content-free motions.
right.
There's all sorts of games that you can play to get rid of the charge. Um, my
Exactly.
mentors used to say anger is like vomit. You have to get it out, but you don't have to get it on
Right.
anyone.
I love that. I mean, it's not a fun image,
It's kind of
but
stinky,
no, but that makes so much sense. You have to get it out, but not on other people.
not
So
on
how
other
do you
people.
do that, right? And like you just explained some ways to do that. Call a girlfriend who's safe, who can hold space for you. There's tons of cathartic release exercises. There's um, the Mama Gina spring cleaning is just it's a practice where a
So
girlfriend
helpful.
asks you like, what have you got about that subject? Thank you. What have you got about that subject? And you just get it all out. So if you want to just Google that, maybe someone will have described it to you and you can try it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different ways that we have of releasing emotions because they're energy in motion. And I love that you said that because it's not just about choosing a different behavior. If you're still feeling angry, you have to release the charge first.
That's what they're feeling with their bodies, is the charge that we have, because they
Right.
know what it feels like when we're calm and peaceful, and they like to be around us then. Same with our kids.
Yes.
And they also know what it's like when we're jacked up or chargy, or and they don't like that as much. And we're the same way. We tend to move away from things that agitate us and towards things that give us pleasure. Um, Gosh, what did you just say? You said something that I wanted to play off of, but I can't remember what it was.
That's okay. Yeah, I was saying emotions are energy and motion. I don't know if that was it.
Oh, I wanted to say emotions are a byproduct of living. It took me
Mhm.
many years to realize,
Yep.
when we eat food, we take in calories and then we use the calories for energy, physical energy, and then we poop and pee the remainder out, the waste. But emotions aren't solid. They're lighter than air, unlike poop and pee. And so emotional energy rises up through our bodies.
Mm.
Sometimes it comes out in the form of a red face or sometimes tears, sometimes
Right.
a hot head, or maybe our neck gets red, um,
Yes.
or we blush, right? Emotions are lighter than air. So they're coming out lighter than air through our heads. 70%
Right.
of our body heat is lost through our heads. That's why our mom in the winter, if you grew up somewhere north or northwest, says put your hat on before you go out because your body will get chilled if you don't preserve the heat. Well, a lot of that heat, it's not just metabolic energy, it's emotional energy coming out.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, many children are taught that emoting is not acceptable. And so our muscles in our shoulders and neck are very tight and strong because they've learned to push the emotions down. But imagine
Absolutely.
that you didn't poop or pee for a week or a month. Or some of my clients tell me they haven't cried for 7 years.
Wow.
Imagine how much emotional pressure is in their system. And
Yeah.
then they get with me and they finally cry and they're like, oh, I look younger. Well,
Hmm.
guess why? You're not storing all that emotional pressure in your body anymore. And when the
Yeah.
pressure comes off, we're actually delightful people.
Right.
We're funny, we're spontaneous, we're loving, we're humorous. Taking the pressure out of our systems is vitally important for our health and
Absolutely.
super important for our ability to love and be loved.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And so it is about learning how to move through the emotions so that you can then choose the behaviors that have a positive tone. And of course, we could do a whole nother interview about that,
I
as I
love
said in the
talking
beginning.
about this stuff. I mean, this
Yes.
has been my lifelong research, and I've been the guinea pig. And I've made so many mistakes. I've alienated so many people. But I did come to peace with my mom before she died. I made peace with her numerous times, made peace with my dad. Like I was telling you earlier, I cohabit with my former husband and we co parent together. Um, have a
Yeah.
wonderful boyfriend. And by and large, my relationships are really harmonious. But I've worked at it because I
Right,
want it
exactly.
that way.
Right. I
For most women,
remember,
relationships are the most important things to them in their lives, even more than their careers, even more than their physical health is our relationships. And so when they're not working, it really negatively impacts our quality of life. But the truth is, they can work, but only if you work it.
right. I love that. It can work if you work it. There's been so many fun sound bites that you've shared in this interview.
I know, I think in sound bites. That's my
Yes.
personality.
I love that. It'll work if you work it.
I stole it first. I stole it from the 12-step program.
Oh,
They say, keep coming back. It works if you work
if
it
you
and
work
you're
it,
worth it.
right. Oh, it works if you work it and you're worth it. I love that.
Me
I
too.
mean, and we're talking about recovery from, toxic
Um,
emotions as well.
yeah, exactly. I actually went to the program called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. I'm not outing anyone. There were no alcoholics in my family, but most of us grow up with some dysfunction, just thinking it's normal.
Yep, totally. Especially if
And
your
then we
parents were
reproduce it.
right. If your parents were having all these power overtones, I know that mine did, then you have to recognize that that was your programming
That's
and
right.
have self compassion when those tones come out of you, and then do the work of releasing the emotional charge and choosing the harmonious tone to be acting from. And I know that that is work. And the question is, what makes it worth it, right?
We get so much dignity Like being the adult in the room is highly satisfying.
It
I
is.
don't have to react to other people's mishigas. That means craziness.
Yes.
I don't have to be at the effect of other people. It restored my dignity. It gave me
Yeah.
dignity. I didn't used to have a choice about how I reacted. And
Right.
because I am a very emotional person, I had a lot of high stakes reactions. And I made a lot of
Mhm.
mistakes that cost me a lot of money, self esteem, dignity. So, I finally took it to heart that I needed to learn these things. Then I liked
Right.
them so much, I was like, I've got to teach these things.
Definitely. I know, me too. It's just this happened to be the biggest shift in my life is because I don't call it shifting your tone, but that's in essence what it is.
What do you call
Is
it?
that's a great question. I mean, I like to call it because I was raised in an environment where my dad used a lot of intimidation just because he didn't have any other tools. He was a very loving person, but he didn't know what else to do. And so I liked to call it transforming conflict into deeper connection
Mm.
because that's my dad and I used to argue all the time as a kid until I learned how to shift my vibe and come from a harmonious tone with him. And then our relationship improved. And so,
Absolutely. You took the responsibility.
yes, exactly. And
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I was able to do that because then I could enjoy connecting with him through the last years of his life as much as possible. And if I hadn't taken the responsibility for that, then we might have still been arguing, right? And that wouldn't have been satisfying. So I agree. At the end of the day, what matters is how we feel about ourselves, not, how other people feel about us.
Yeah. Eleanor Roosevelt said, other people's opinions of me are none of my business.
Exactly. And at the same time, what the research shows is that the best determinant of long-term happiness is the quality of our relationships. So those
So
are
that's the best determinant of long term happiness in ourselves.
right.
Mhm.
Exactly. Is the quality of our relationships with others. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we care about what they think about us, but that the quality feels harmonious and that we have people that are close in our lives
That's
that
why
we
I'm
feel
happy, I
connected to.
guess, to
Mhm.
point it out is there's no one that I currently feel incomplete with. There's no one that I have a bone to
Yes.
pick with. If things come up
Yes.
as they do from time to time with my loved ones, then I resolve them and I come to acceptance, which is another way of loving them for who they are.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that. Or, like if, as with both of us, we were geeking out about how we both call our ex-husbands our husbands because we're both on good terms with our ex-husbands. And so it doesn't like the term ex seems like it has animosity. So
I think
husband
so too. It's what
represents
they're
us
not
more.
instead of what they are.
Exactly. And so sometimes you might choose to change the what the relationship is and what its purpose is and what you're co-creating, but that doesn't mean you have to close your heart.
Not at all. That when we close our heart, it only hurts us. You've
Mhm.
heard the expression, feeling resentment towards another is like taking poison and expecting them to die.
Yep, yep.
And
I
that's
have
why I
indeed
call
heard
those
that.
power overtones the toxic tones, because they
Mhm.
really hurt the person that's getting them. They also hurt the person that's giving them. But,
Exactly.
we just we just do what we grew up with. We do what we
Yeah.
learned how to do, and our bodies grow up no matter what.
Yep.
Our emotions take more intentionality.
Yes.
And there's nowhere that it's really readily available to learn. And one of the things is that, women came into the workforce about 60 years ago. We got the right to vote about 100 years ago. I'm talking about the United States. And as we move into the professions, we also humanize the professions. We
Hmm.
bring our values into the workplace. We bring our
Hmm.
values into social interactions. And I think that's why the field of relationship coaching or intimacy coaching is growing, is because we know it's a vital human need. We don't see anyone else out there providing it, and we can do that.
Yeah, exactly. Or, so many people need it and we need qualified professionals to provide it. So, that's why it's my pleasure to be able to interview you and serve my audience by them learning about your work and the emotional tones and how to create harmony in your relationships with men. So I really, really appreciate all this information. I think it was so nuanced, and I'm going to download the handout and study it and, you know, try it with my husband and see what kind of results I get, and maybe even geek out about it with him because I'm lucky that he doesn't mind talking about these things with me,
My
which is
boyfriend likes it too.
right. It's like, it's just, I mean, it was just important for me as a relationship coach to choose a man who likes talking about relationship issues, right? Which is
Exactly.
kind of rare. So I got a good one.
I'm
No,
glad.
I mean, of course, like you said, if we know how to talk about what we want to talk about with a harmonious tone, then men like talking about it with us because we're enjoying ourselves. So, that
But
could
I
be
think
another
energetic
experiment.
compatibility is super important. Having the same or compatible levels of energy and desire to talk about the same things and explore
Yeah.
the same things. I don't know if you've heard this, but I was reminded when you said the quote about long-term happiness is that research shows that the greatest predictor of long-term compatibility between a man and a woman is similar levels of aspiration.
Hmm.
So they want the same things out of life.
Right.
And that's why they're willing to do the work together because they have a strong partner that's aligned with what they want for their life.
Exactly. Yeah, I talk about that in terms of shared values rather than just shared interests. But of course, there's different ways of describing it. But yes, I completely agree. It's that you're actually valuing the same things in life. You want to strive towards the same things. You have the same, because it's not just goals like I want to run a marathon, although that's a great goal, but you don't have to both share that. But it's a similar level of ambition and a similar level of valuing challenging yourself and growing. And so
Mhm.
you would be compatible with someone who wants to challenge themselves and grow in another way, but that's just as you know that values growth just as much. Otherwise, one person will grow apart from the other if they don't value growth as much. So I completely agree. And although that's there's so many different topics and that we can cover in so many different aspects that determine compatibility in the long term. And I think emotional tone is definitely one of the most important ones. And so
Yeah,
if
that's
people
one of
want,
those skill sets that we can acquire. It's not that it's hard to learn. Like a lot of the ladies in my class say, well, this is hard. And I say, that puts the locus of control outside yourself. It's not
right,
actually hard or easy, but you're a beginner at it. And when we're a
yes,
beginner at something, we're unskilled. So
yes,
come back in 3 months having practiced, and you won't find it so hard anymore because then you'll be an intermediate beginner. You'll already be
exactly.
gaining competency with it. And any new skill at the beginning, we're not good at it. That's the whole point.
Exactly. I like to say practice makes effective, but I'm looking for a better way to say that because I don't believe in perfection and I
I
haven't found a
love
better
that. It
word.
makes us effective. It makes us competent.
Right, right.
Practicing competency makes us competent. Do
That's
you know
true.
the competency scale where you start out as a beginner and you finish as a master?
Um, I don't actually, but
Yeah,
that
you
would
can
be
look up the
useful.
scale of competency. I don't know whose scale it is, but it's very effective to keep people
Cool. I'm gonna write that
having a
down.
perspective when they learn something new. So, beginner, intermediate beginner, advanced beginner, intermediate, it goes all the way up to, and I believe they come perhaps from music because there's the maestro, there's the expert, and finally, after 10,000 hours of practicing something, they can be called a master.
Ooh, I like it.
So, just we're
Um,
always developing our competencies. Some
yes.
of us had to become competent at Zoom. or at screen interviews, or putting makeup on for the camera, or
Oh my
all
God.
sorts of, or my lighting, by the way. So we had to develop competencies because it's getting dark outside and I was using daylight. So we have to become competent at things that we never thought we would take on. But that's really what
Exactly.
growth is about, is becoming competent.
I agree. And in order to become competent, we have to weather the emotional storms of judging ourselves if we judge ourselves and we're not perfect and all that. And
That's
so
right.
I know that you have a wonderful free gift for our audience. How can women keep their cool in a stressful or high pressure situation? So I know that that also, whatever you, I mean, I haven't gotten your free gift, although I will now, because I loved this interview. And so, and it's called Holding Your Ground. And
It's
so
called holding your ground.
I imagine that would also be useful in this kind of situation where you're like, well, first of all, if you're angry, how do I shift my vibe? Right. Or if you're judging yourself because you're a beginner, how do you then shift your vibe so that you can feel centered and harmonious inside yourself? And so that's, I imagine, what the free gift addresses. Do you want to talk more about that?
It does, yes. I was talking to a corporate audience. It was during COVID, and I was being interviewed in my porch, my patio off of my house. And holding your ground is about when you're feeling intimidation or you're feeling seduction. How do you stay present and keep your cool? So it's a three-step process. It's things that you naturally are going to do, but the main way to avoid being reactive is to practice, practice, practice.
Yep.
So practice saying, are you being intimidating? Practice your lines, because when the stress is high,
Right.
we tend to default to a behavior and
Right.
we get what we practiced.
Yep.
So if you've practiced taking a deep breath, closing your eyes and looking the person in the eye and saying, are you trying to intimidate me? Then you have a chance to resurrect that behavior
Right.
neurologically when the heat is on. But if,
Yes.
like most children, we've just practiced sulking or screaming or some behavior that isn't gonna uh, calm things down and create power with, if we've never practiced the power with tools, it's going to be a lot harder to access them. So I literally jokingly say, practice with your date. Even tell them, I'm going to practice what I'm learning in my communications class with you.
Yeah.
Practice with your children, practice with your girlfriends,
Yep.
because at the beginning, it doesn't feel natural
Of
to
course.
say things in a calm and emotional tone. We haven't
No,
practiced those things.
it's
We've
true.
practiced flipping our lid, losing our cool, blowing it when the pressure gets high.
Yep.
So just practicing bantering instead of belittling, and
Yes.
it's fun. It's sort of like actors training for real life.
It is. It is.
Eventually you feel it because you can access those feelings. Remember, the feminine has enormous agility with our emotions. But if we never practice them, we don't know it. We just
Yes.
walk around feeling like we're always mad, or other people give us feedback. Why are you so sad? Because
Right.
we have to practice running those emotional tones. Remember, a tone is a vibration. So you hit a bell and it rings, the sound ripples out and it goes into your body, into your eardrums, and you hear and feel the tone. Well,
Yep.
whenever we speak, people over there are hearing and feeling our tone.
It's
So practicing the other
true.
tones, first, it enlivens us, it deepens us, it
Yes.
makes us more capable and having more capacity, but also it allows us to touch others in different ways.
I agree. I agree.
It's like
And
growing ourselves up.
Exactly. And then the other thing besides practice that really works for me is if you're in a committed relationship and you have a lot of trust and safety with your partner, one of the things, because I'm still learning, as I said, I grew up in an environment with tons of intimidation and power over. And so it still comes out of me at some point. And when it does, what helps me learn is to do a do-over. Um,
Yeah. How do
it's
you do
like,
it?
oh, so I mean, first, because my husband is emotionally sensitive, he wants me to apologize for my unskillful behavior. And so then once I do that, then he wants me to do it over because, well, I've shared with him that me doing it over is how I learn,
Hmm.
right? And the science behind that is because the subconscious mind is programmed by repetition and strong emotion. And so if
Correct.
I'm feeling the strong emotion of remorse, from
Mm.
not wanting to intimidate him, then I'm doing a do over, then that's programming it in much more effectively than if I just practiced with a girlfriend, although practice makes effective with repetition. But in that moment when I'm doing the do over, that's what really trains me to do it differently next time because I'm feeling the emotion of connected, like wanting him to feel connected to me. And that's just so powerful. So, in my opinion, that's another good way to learn. Practice
Yeah,
beforehand and
wanting another
do overs
outcome. What do you
after, and
do? Do
then you
you go
can
rewind?
that would actually be really fun.
My
I
son
should
and I
totally
used to
add
do that when
that.
he was little. I was like, let's try that again. I used to stop the car when he would lose his temper. I wouldn't drive
Yeah,
because it
right,
really derailed my consciousness to
right.
have someone yelling in the car with me. And then
Yeah.
we would just be late to wherever we were going.
Yeah, and then you have an opportunity to be present with his feelings so you can help him organize them rather than just be yelled at. So, yes, I
Right.
think that that's really helpful in parenting. Of course, there's many different parenting tools that we can use, but practicing these harmonious tones with your children is what's going to teach them to then use them and for the rest of their lives. So,
And
it is
even
worth it.
telling them what you're doing, even
Yeah,
posting the chart,
totally.
most
Kids
of
love
my
learning and
clients
yeah,
carry this chart around.
I love it. I'm actually
And
gonna put it on my phone and look at it.
it becomes second nature at some point. When you see how people respond to you, that you're able to win hearts and minds with it,
Mm.
then it becomes
Yes.
like really like a power deck.
Yes, I love that. It just feels like that's what allows us to have the motivation to keep going is when we feel the positive results of feeling connected to the people that you care about and
So good.
co-creating instead of arguing. And so yes,
There's
that's
nothing
what's
better than
possible
that.
when you really apply these tools. And so I encourage everybody to go to Karen's website. It is businessaspleasure.com. So I will put that in the comments below the video as well as in the show notes to the podcast. And on your website, that's where people can get your free gift. And
Yep.
then it's holding your
In fact,
ground.
when you go to my website, if you don't do anything else, but you just fill your email in the pink screen that pops up, and it'll address the keeping your cool and holding your ground, then I think it goes out within a matter of minutes automatically to your email box.
Oh, great. Yes. So people can get that as soon as they want to. And it's just a critically important skill to know how to hold our ground. So I think I'm going to get that too, because I love learning new tools. And so I've loved this interview. I really feel like I've gotten something out of it that I can then use and just how to infuse my relationship with more playfulness and pleasure and choosing more tones to come from. And so I really appreciate everything that you've shared, and I'm sure that my audience will too.
Thank
Of
you, Valerie.
course,
It's such a
of
pleasure to talk
course.
to you. I can't wait to come to New York and meet you.
Oh my God, I know that'd be wonderful. Please do. And and let me know when you are, of course. And then, of course, if people have questions, then I encourage you to ask them in the comments. And if there is something else that you want me to interview Karen about, feel free to ask that as well, or just feel free to tell us what it is that you want us to be talking about, because of course we always want to serve you and what you love to learn about, because this is of course what our passion is. And so thank you so much, Karen, for this wonderful information. And I encourage everybody to get your free gift Holding Your Ground and to check out Karen's work, because it is so deep and so multifaceted. We've only covered one small portion of it today. And I just wish everybody that you feel empowered to do the work, because it's worth it, because you're worth it, and it works if you work it, right? That's what we have said, and that just applies
That's
to
right.
all of these tools. So till next time.